Perfect.
Hey everyone, and if you're on Facebook, sorry you're going to hear this again, but welcome. Good morning. It's super early in the morning, so I'm sorry that frozen picture looks like death, but like I said, it's early in the morning. We are continuing our conversation today, and my co-host is Christine Seifien Wolk, who was also a professor of psychology. Psychology, right?
Yeah,
At
clinical.
Antioch. And tell us what you did there.
So I was a professor in the graduate program, the clinical psychology department. So we were basically a master's program for those who are looking to become psychotherapists. So I was really in the mix and in the middle of everything that's happening now with the schools and with queering. All of that started in upper academia, starts at the college level and filters down. So I was a part of that machine for quite some time until I stepped out. And this is what I do now is speak out about what is going wrong and what we might need to do to right our path.
Right. And so that means we couldn't ask for a better co-host for what we're
Thank
talking
you.
about today, which is social and emotional learning and the clearing of childhood psychology.
Yes.
So we're just going to get started. So we're going to talk about social and emotional learning. And once again, friends, recognize that they always use words that sound good. Who wouldn't want their children to have control of their social and emotional behaviors? But what you have to understand is that social and emotional learning, while it may have started off in a good place, and what we've been told, what we've studied, is that it started off with trying to help foster children, of something I have quite an extensive history about myself, helping foster children be able to control their emotions within the classroom. Now, what this is basically doing is saying that all children have trauma, especially because of the events of 2020. And so all children need social and emotional learning. But transformative social and emotional learning's main focus is, as you will see as we go through this, queer theory. All right. So queer activists believe that entering crisis is required and desired part of learning. They believe this because they think that students must be shocked out of the harmful repetition of oppressive norms in their classroom.
Hmm.
For example, suppose students think society is meritocratic, but learn that it is racist. I think that's interesting, but learn that it is
Yes. Yes.
racist. Or think they are themselves not contributing to homophobia, but learn that they are. In such situations, students learn that the ways they think and act are not only limited, but also oppressive. Do you get it? They learn, they learn, they learn. Are they learning or are they just being force fed that this is the truth?
Oh, yeah. Force fed, indoctrinated, force fed. Any of those apply.
So, um, learning about oppression and about ways they often unknowingly, that's called implicit bias, comply with oppression can lead students to feel paralyzed. Now, this is why they say it's important that they shock them um, out of a harmful repetition. They want to shock your children in school. So they may feel paralyzed with anger, sadness, anxiety, and guilt in K-12. And it
And
can
that
lead,
leads
what'd
emotional
you say?
crisis.
Or
Oh, I was just finishing the sentence that can lead to emotional crisis,
so what is
which is
emotion?
quite
Yeah.
it's quite interesting to me because, yesterday I was doing another podcast with my other group, and we were also reviewing a book called Bad Therapy. And one of
And
the
your other
points that
group is
CTA, Critical Therapy Antidote. So it's basically a network of therapists with dissident voices from this mainstream kind of narrative, that are all seeking to find each other and figure out how we get out of this mess that we're in, partly because the field of psychology has created a really open door, walk right in kind of pathway for this to enter the schools. And so
right.
we were talking about the dangers of having people sit in spaces where they are in an emotional crisis and it's not A, the right time, it's not B, the right place, and the right professionals aren't there to deal with it. And we're forcing an emotional crisis to occur that isn't even natural. It's not necessarily that they walked into the classroom or they walked into the therapist's office and something reminded them of an event and triggered it. It's that we are purposefully triggering the emotional crisis to happen. And the dangers in that are leading to increases in depression, increases in anxiety, increases in self-harm behavior, increases in suicidal ideation, increases in completed suicides. This is where it becomes hugely problematic that teachers, okay, who don't have that kind of training are inserting this, infusing this into the classroom. Whether they have a choice or not is a different story, but that's what's happening. It's not safe for the teachers either, by the way. That's also not a place to be putting their own emotional, mental state exposure in that sense either.
Can you imagine what a teacher has to feel when they have went through these trainings they have created, not necessarily on their own because they're told that this is best practices, right?
Yes,
And then they find out that one of their students is self-harmed or worse.
yes. And they don't know how to handle it. And what they have online out here in California, I was a little bit more involved with the school district when I first sort of spoke out about Antioch and what was happening in the profession. And I was attending those meetings and more involved. So I looked at some of the curriculum. They're having teachers download toolkits. Okay, so mindfulness and other intervention type um, behaviors, interventions are things that we do in therapy to help work with our clients. But they have these toolkits for teachers that they get to just download without an ounce of training, without an ounce of reading a book, even no exposure whatsoever. And these toolkits are supposed to read and learn how to practice some of these interventions in class, how to draw kids out, with their feelings and how to help them resolve those feelings. These are people that aren't even professional, and this is in the middle of the school day. So what's happening is it's cutting from learning. That's exactly where, it's not the school day hasn't gotten longer to accommodate this. It's cutting from the learning time, essentially, right? And these teachers
Right.
are being placed in an untenable position themselves.
Right. And if they don't do it, well, then they're a problem and they might find themselves
Then
out.
they're a problem. And, they had to sit through, and I sat through this, I watched this, a PhD from Harvard telling every single person in the room that if you're white, you have a natural racist tendency and you're a tendency to be a white supremacist, even if that's not your intention. It's looming under the surface because of this implicit bias nonsense. And you need to go home today, look yourself in the mirror, and think about all the ways in which you have become, or all the ways in which you have shown that you are racist, and how do you become an anti-racist. This is what the teachers are learning. That's what they're bringing into the social emotional learning arm of this entire picture that we've been talking about. That's what they're bringing with them into the classroom. So they're having these kids do privilege wheels where they sit there and draw all the ways in which they're privileged. And when they get upset and they feel guilty, that's when the teacher steps in and they have these inappropriate conversations that are inappropriate because children are not sophisticated enough mentally and emotionally at certain points until they reach a certain level of adulthood to be able to even handle the implications of what all of this really means, let
Right.
alone sit and learn it and try to regurgitate it on a test, for example.
Right.
It was horrifying to me when I saw that, and it was completely unethical, even against the practice of psychology. The fact that psychologists wrote that material for teachers was horrifying.
Right. So pushing children into personal crisis is a necessary component of queer pedagogy. It
Yes,
is a necessary component. That means it must happen.
yes,
Pushing our kids into personal crisis. And then what happens? Well, then we say, our kids are in crisis, so they need more mental health.
yes,
So it's just this wheel. It's a never
yes.
wheel. There's so many wheels. It's like one of those gear machines.
Yes. And then as a child, you feel left out if you don't have trauma. This whole idea of trauma and that everybody's experienced trauma, the idea was to open the trauma window up a little bit, which I think we talked about last time, but
Right,
so that it includes people who've been sexually assaulted, it includes
right,
people that have been raped and maimed and all sorts of different things, emotionally abused severely. But we've opened it even further so that, you'll hear some therapists say just to be alive is traumatic.
right.
Just to be a human is traumatic. Now
Exactly.
there's something to this idea that human despair is part of the human condition. The problem is we're A, pushing them into that, and B, we're also trying to rescue them at the same time from ever having to learn how to resolve and emotionally find your resilience, self-soothe so that you can
Right.
actually function as you move forward and develop and grow.
We're also
So
reframing what resilience means, because a lot of this stuff will
exactly.
say, oh, SEL is about teaching resilience. No, it's about forcing your kids to have to find some sort of let me out of this mess that I'm in. And
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. So again, pushing children into personal crisis is a necessary component, because it's for students to work for positive social change.
Yes.
I went too fast. Social change. Crisis is required to destabilize and dislodge a child's desire to be, listen to this, normal. Crisis is required to make your child not want to be normal,
Hmm.
which manifests as entrenched resistance. You get it? They take our words. So we think, well, of course I want my child to be resilient. Of course I want them to resist feeling bad about certain things. I want them to grow through that. But they don't need the things that they are being told. Those things are in fact a lie, because remember, the idea is to reject truth,
Yes.
which is what's quote unquote normal. So So queer theory requires them to have entrenched resistance. Resistance. They want to turn
Yeah.
children into actors.
And this idea of trying to dismantle normalcy is a massive problem. Normalcy is what gives us guardrails in society. It's what gives us guardrails in our class classrooms, in our relationships. It provides, okay, the idea of normalcy provides a set of kind of norms, okay, that most people fall in, that tend to keep people relatively grounded, with a solid foundation, that tend to keep people, that help people understand, especially mental health professionals, the difference between a normal reaction to something and something that is actually pathological. They want to get rid of the word pathological from the textbooks and from the language in psychology, because they don't want this sense of normalcy to ever exist. Well, pathology only exists if normalcy does too. But if you erase normalcy, then you erase pathology. You erase anything that's problematic behavior, that's perverse behavior, that's immoral behavior. The list goes on and on. So this idea of wanting to disrupt normalcy is particularly alarming.
You know what? That reminds me. I want to say what I usually say in the beginning of these videos. When we're talking about perverse, you need to understand that Logan Lanncing, the author of this book, oh, I can never show it. There we go. Maybe. Anyways, no,
We just need the
darn.
title. Okay.
Anyways, so the queering of the American child. Um, he is a classical liberal. This is not a person who is putting his religious views into the book. I don't know his religious views, and I'm grateful.
Yes.
He is
Yes.
not anti-gay. As you'll see in this.
And
The
perversion does not mean gayness, by the
exact
way.
exactly.
So we'll make that very clear. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
doing that.
Yes, that's what was most important. So the process is violent and disruptive. Again, this book is about K-12 ed and the process that teachers are being told. And I'm sure, I cannot imagine most of the teachers I know being okay with being told you're going to be violent and disruptive in your classroom. They're told we're going to dismantle systems of oppression. They're told,
Yes.
they're slow boiled into this. No teacher, well, there's a few, but most teachers are not going to be okay if they say, yeah, we're going to make your classrooms violent and disruptive. We're going to make your kindergarten classroom that way. Nobody's really, I shouldn't say nobody, that's a blanket statement, but that is what they say. The process is violent and disruptive because it endeavors to disrupt some deeply entrenched truths and taken for granted assumptions, beliefs, values, and practices. So let's do that. Assumptions, beliefs, values, practices. That's 4. And as we go through this book, you will find that those 4 aren't a whole lot different than the 4 olds of a communist revolution.
Mm.
It's easier to brainwash a child into a cult when they are an emotional wreck. And that's true, right? You know a lot about cults.
Yes, that is true. The cults attract people who are in a vulnerable state, and they start with love bombing them. And that immediate feeling of being love bombed, and feeling as though you fit in, as though you're loved, all these amazing, wonderful things are said about you, and you're absolutely enamored by them. It's the most perfect treatment for somebody that's in this complete state of disarray, who's feeling shame, who's feeling guilt, who's feeling, inappropriately responsible for things that they actually didn't do, but another generation, centuries ago, or a century ago, have done, for example. And the love bombing at that point right away gives a sense that, wow, I found people I can connect with. Wow, I found people who care about me. And wow, they want to do the same things that I do, which is to try to resolve all of these things that we've caused, right? And normally it's white people, all these things that we've caused as white supremacists. That's usually what they're talking about in most cases.
Well, and I
Or
want to hit
people,
on that because that in itself is a lie. As
yes,
the majority, it's not the majority that was doing all of these things. It wasn't the
that's right.
majority that had slaves. We need to
That's
get that out
right.
of our heads. That's one of the first things I tell my students. Do you know who the
Yes,
first person who bought a slave was? And when I tell them that it was a black man in America, this
yes,
person,
yes,
they go, "What?" Their little minds
yes,
are blown. And I'm like, so that's where we'll start, and we will go more into that later on. But I think it's really important that we tell them the truth, because what they're doing is taking little pieces,
absolutely.
blanketing it all over and saying, now you have to feel guilty for this. And your family might not have even been here for this.
Yes,
So they may not have been here during those generations. So they don't need to take this on. And also, it's just a very, we know that word is being used all the time right now, joy. And it is making the classroom a joyless place.
yes,
Reframing that term while they're making our kids miserable
yes,
intentionally.
yes,
And again, I do not believe that that is the teacher, but I do believe that the people who created what the teachers have to learn, they know exactly what they're doing. In fact, so this is page 135 in the book. I tried really hard to get the numbers in this time. And about a third of the page is the resources that this is coming from.
yes,
And I love
yes,
that, because then you can't say, oh, that's not true. That's a bunch of hogwash,
yes,
because the resources are all right on the bottom, the footnotes of the page. So, next page. Said another way, the point of asking a child to pick up various identities is to remove that child from the normal category so the educator can position them against it. So they want to take our children and pick them up and have them pick up a bunch of different identities, and must have missed a page, to remove that child from the normal category so that the educator can position them against it. And I say this all the time. The goal of school is to make activists of our children.
yes. That
They
is what they intend to do.
they are fighting things that they know nothing about, and they're only told a one-sided version. And then they believe it's their minds, their new way of knowing, it's teaching us. this stuff.
And I think what's, just the most disgusting part of this whole thing is that these people that are these people at the top, these people that are in higher academia, that's where all of these ideas began. They began in higher education learning communities, unfortunately. But that's the reality. Those people, those adults are exploiting and using children, your neighbor's children, your family members' other children to accomplish their agenda. That to me is absolutely horrifying. That's abusive. I don't think that that's too strong of a word here. It's emotionally abusive. And that's
So
what these people are doing. They're using them as conduits to push their own agenda forward. These kids that are barely learning who they are themselves and trying to get comfortable in their bodies and going through puberty and going through all these changes. And here goes a truckload of hogwash dumped on top of them for the sake of moving an agenda forward that had nothing to do with starting in K through 12 classrooms and everything to do with starting in bigger institutions for bigger institutional purposes and results.
well, and we talk about higher ed, but higher ed, much of it is funded from the CCP and from Qatar.
There we
So
go.
when you start going to where it comes from, well, these are
There you
people
go.
who hate our country,
Yes, they hate
or they
our
hate the West.
country.
I'd say they
They
hate the
hate the
entire
West
West,
because
right?
they hate the UK and the rest of Europe
Yes,
too. They hate
exactly.
the West. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So
And they're funded by people like the CC. You're right. The Chinese Communist Party, for anybody who's not familiar with it, which
right,
I'm sure you all are if you're watching Carrie's material, but it is not conspiracy theory to know that and to believe that. It's actually very true and backed up by some really good resources and some really good source material. So if
right,
you're kind of wondering about that, I recommend people look at the sources that are used in the book.
right. And also just, I mean, watch TikTok and look at other countries. Look at
Yes,
countries that are not the West and how well they're doing in education. And look at the West and look at how quickly it's plummeting and how things have to be made up in order for
yes,
this to happen.
yes,
So queer activists must first persuade the kids to see themselves as different. And that's where that wheel of privilege and power comes in. So you might be normal in this category, but surely you get to be different in one of these outer categories or one of those even further outer categories, right? So that is the goal. Queer activists must first persuade kids to see how they are different by forcing a separation of their sense of self from a sense of normalcy. How am I not normal? Because if I can
hmm
find that one place where I'm not normal, then they are led to feel as though they are oppressed because they are abnormal.
hmm and the trauma hits, right? That's where we start to now use this word trauma again to describe somebody's experience. And the more trauma you have, okay, quotes around trauma that you
Right,
have, the more you are going to fit in with your peers. And this is more so about that than it is about getting adult approval. It's more about fitting in with your peers and having a place in your peer group. And in order to do that, if Miss Susie over here has been traumatized, if I don't find something that, my own trauma, I've got to dig for it, then I'm not going to be able to be part of Miss Susie's friendship group and
right,
part of her,
right,
peers. So
right.
let's force these kids to find where the trauma is,
Yep.
assuming that they've all had trauma. And I forgot to mention this yesterday when we were doing something similar, but the ACEs study, and you may be familiar with it, Carrie. It was a study that was funded by a hospital, Kaiser Permanente, in the 90s. And it stands for Adult Child, what is it? Adverse Child Experiences. That's what it
Right.
stands for, ACEs. And they give kind of a series of questions and you answer them. Did my parent drink a little more than I think they should have? Check. Was my parent not home as often to cook me dinner as I would have liked? Check. Things like that are very broad, very, kind of overarching. And most of us could check yes to almost every single one of them. Well,
Right.
this is what they use to determine the chances that children will experience major trauma or have already experienced major trauma. And these adverse experiences, that most people have had some version of in their lives because nobody grew up in a perfect family.
Right.
And so this is what they bring in to do these assessments. And so the more boxes you check on this check sheet, the checklist, the more trauma you've experienced, which brings you closer together to other people who've experienced trauma. It's trauma bonding.
Yes.
And whether or not, and every one of us, by the way, and I've taught the ACEs many times to many classes, and I always have my adult students take the ACEs. Almost every single time, I've not found one student yet in hundreds and hundreds of students that I've taught that did not fill out the form in a way that they are considered having experienced massive levels of trauma, massive, not just a little bit, okay, but the big stuff.
Right.
So what does that say, right?
Well, and
It's
so
that,
that's an interesting one because I've taken that too. And although the one that I took was much more in depth, and
yes,
I was a 9 on the ACEs, the only thing bad that had never happened to me was I'd never seen someone killed in front of me.
yes,
But everything else, parents in prison, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, all of that to extreme degrees. The
yes,
thing is that when I took it, I thought, what's the point? Like,
yes,
what is the point here? Because most people who would take a test and get these scores would go, oh my goodness, I can't survive for the rest of my life. Maybe I don't even need a life. Maybe I'm just too damaged, whatever, right?
right.
And so watching that and having foster children have to take that, I would always have a conversation with these kids and say, that is your past.
Yes,
What you do with your future is up to you.
yes,
And that is the part that I always found missing in the ACEs. The ACEs always had this, well, now you're more likely to be fat. Now you're more
yes,
likely to be divorced. Now you're more likely to be this and this and this. And I was like, what a depressing piece of garbage.
yes,
Devoid of hope.
yes.
That's how
It's
I saw
completely
it.
devoid of
And I
hope.
know that's my personal opinion,
No, it's
but
devoid of hope. It is.
it's also, lived experience. And
And
so,
what did it do? It granted funding for mental health
right.
services in schools. That study was prominent in
Yeah,
providing funding. I mean, and
yeah,
so if we really dig into that, right, again, where's the agenda? Because
right.
there's an agenda
Exactly.
behind all of it.
Exactly.
But yeah, yeah, that's not
So,
surprising.
so only when kids can be taught the key reversal that activates them. Anybody who says that K-12 is not about activating kids when they adopt queer theory or when they adopt, listen to me, and I will put it at the end of this, safe and welcoming schools. When
Yes,
they adopt that, welcoming means welcoming to the agenda.
yes,
Welcoming does not mean being kind. We never needed all this stuff to be kind to kids. Like,
yes,
now, welcoming means welcoming to that agenda, accepting the point of everyone, no matter what. What about kind to yourself?
yes,
Yourself or kind to your children means not breaking their brains for an agenda.
yes,
So, only when kids can be taught the key reversal that activates them, because they are oppressed. That's the goal here.
yep,
So then they begin to resent society because society, by failing to accommodate their quirks, is what makes them abnormal.
yes,
So school is about accommodation, it's about embodiment. I believe that should scare you.
it should terrify every person that has school age children. And the purpose of this isn't that we want people to turn around scared and freaked out. You need to be scared and terrified so that you can become educated about it and then become empowered to do something about it to make a change.
Yes,
Right. So that's what
exactly.
this is really about ultimately for us, which is why
Exactly.
we're here.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't like scary movies and I don't like
Sure.
I don't like the idea that
Yeah.
people are being
Sure.
manipulated. But if you don't recognize it, you cannot protect your children from it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's why we do what we do.
Yes.
So it is most viable not in queer theory, but in disability studies. And this is the part that gets really tricky because when you hear disability, you start to think, oh my gosh, are they against disability? And absolutely not. If you need accessibility, if you need a wheelchair,
Of course.
a room, of course you need what you need. Um, Having been a parent educator, I would have kids who still couldn't write. And so they would tell you what to do and you would write for them because they literally, that's what they needed. The trick is that they've taken trauma and said that because every child has been traumatized due to the effects of 2020, 2021,
Mm,
2022, that all children, their trauma makes them disabled, literally.
yes.
That's where this goes.
Yes.
So, which is shared ideas and structure with queer theory for decades under what is called the social model of disability. Interpreted critically, people with disabilities are not believed to be disabled by their disabilities, right? We change disabled or handicapped to
Yes.
disabled. There's some other term, I can't remember what it is, but
Yeah, I can't either. It's changed a lot multiple times over the
right,
years.
right. Handicapable is one I've heard. So
Yes.
they are disabled by society failing to fully accommodate their disabilities to the point where their disabilities are irrelevant in day-to-day life. So now how many of our kids are self-diagnosing? How many kids
Yes.
say, oh, I'm neurodivergent and I'm ADHD and I'm blah 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 and I'm blah blah blah. Whether or not they've had that thing. I mean, I jokingly sort of talk about being ADHD because I'm all over the place all the time, but I have no diagnosis for it.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just, it is what it is. Um,
Well, and then there's another point of view that's like, well, the reason there's so much of that now is because in society we've come to a place where we're more comfortable talking about it and just it's not as stigmatized as it was in the past. I highly disagree. And I would not have said this a few years ago. I would have said, yes, the reason why there's so much depression and anxiety is because now we're able to talk about it. So everybody comes out and says it. I believe that there are key components, key factors in how society has changed that have created more depression and anxiety. I do not necessarily believe it's talked about more because it's less stigmatized. That is a part of the pie, a piece of the pie. The whole rest of the pie is the fundamental change in society that has happened. The fact that we're distant from each other, we communicate via social media and via electronic devices. The fact that we have kids in school over here that are getting queerified every single day. I think all of those components, you can add to it the economy and the fact that now parents are working more than one job. We can go on and on. But the fundamental changes in society, in my view, are the reason why we're seeing such a huge skyrocket in depression and anxiety, not necessarily only because it's less stigmatized to talk about.
right. A- Absolutely. But I do think that the normalization, because there was
Yes,
so
that's
much
also
normalized
normalized
mental
now.
health, normalize. And
Yes,
and that opens up the door for everybody to adopt whatever they want to, which is what it's
sure.
about, right? So that everything, including relationships with people
Yes.
of ages that make no sense, everything needs to be accommodated.
Yes.
So, okay. So accommodate their disabilities to the point where disabilities are irrelevant. That is, disabled people are disabled because they are oppressed, not because they were
Yes.
born with a handicap, not because they were born with, you know, a difference that makes life harder for them and they need those accommodations. But they are oppressed by an ableist society that fails to accommodate them. It is society's fault. Can you read that next one? Because it's over my line.
Yep. The queer is only abnormal because society defines and oppresses abnormality. It's the justification to transform society so that it fully accommodates the critical activist. You want me to keep going?
You can, or unless you have
Okay.
a comment about that, but I yeah,
No, yeah, we can keep going. Social and emotional learning, SEL, is the tool that queer activists use to help students work through their manufactured identity crisis productively, in air quotes. SEL, social emotional learning, provides the space, in quotes, in the curriculum in which students can work through crisis and move from being stuck and into a different intellectual, emotional, and political space. So,
Did you hear what they said? That last one?
yes, SEL provides the space in the curriculum. So when your child is supposed to be learning math and science and reading and writing, this is what they're learning. There's space in the curriculum. But again, they're not making the days any longer. So they're cutting from other types of learning that you're supposed to be doing in school as a child.
Right. Right.
It's really unbelievable.
It's abusive.
It is
So,
abusive.
but I think more than that, listen to that last one, being stuck and into a different intellectual, emotional, and political space.
And that's the big key word there this is all about.
Yeah. The goal is one political party.
Mm-hmm.
And that your children believe, because quite frankly, this is slavery.
Yes.
So your children believe that they are fighting for everything they believe in.
Yes.
But they're not taught they're not taught to think about what they believe in. They are taught climate change is real. You must eat the bugs. You must accept that the person who identifies as the hamster is the hamster. You must,
that's right.
You must. And there is no, but what if they're not? But what if it's not? But what if I don't have to? There's no but what ifs. This is
and this isn't
yes,
it's not it's and this is not like protesting in the 60s, right, was such a big thing on campus and whatnot. We're not talking about that, protesting wars, all of that. We're talking about the fact that they're getting into a kindergartner's classroom and starting to dismantle everything that they know about the world little by little
before
at
they
the
know
age of
anything
5
about
or
it.
6, before they know anything about it, at the age of 5 and 6, and then up through obviously high school. That's not the same thing as the radical protesters from the 60s, where everybody went to college and was trying to find themselves, and the wars were happening, and we're out there protesting. Those two should not be confused to be the same type of thing. This isn't something that you just grow out of, which is what happened with most of those protesters back in the day. I will admit that I was one of them. Take Back the Night was our big movement at my school, right, for women who were assaulted. And
yes.
yeah, right. Yeah. So this is something completely different. This is about before your child even understands the world, as you said, Carrie, changing the way they think about it and the way they think about themselves in relation to that, and instilling in them not just them being oppressed, but that they are also oppressors, because the white kids are told all the ways in which they're oppressors, and they come home and feel guilty. And I have a friend of mine, a friend of our family's child, come home from school one day and say, I feel horrible. Why is that, son? Well, because I'm white, I'm learning that I'm oppressing and hurting and harming other people. And this is a 13-year-old, a 13-year-old child. Like, that isn't going to lead to some sort of depression and possible suicidal ideation. I mean, because it's a box you can never get out of. That's the other thing about queering. You never make it to the goal. The end goal, the goalpost is constantly being pushed, because no matter what, these things will always exist in society. The oppression and the slavery that we're inflicting upon people, all of this never ends.
Right.
So how did that sound to a 13-year-old who's already having all these puberty changes and maybe doesn't have a whole lot of friends, and maybe is awkward and uncomfortable in their own bodies? Enter gender dysphoria. That's a perfect opportunity, right, to love bomb them right into gender dysphoria.
Exactly. Okay, so according to Castle, and this is a side note because I am in Utah. I am not certain that there is any other state that is more embraced Castle than Utah, where they regularly bring in Tim Shriver, the founder of Castle, And he is a good friend of our governor and our governor's wife.
Lovely. Right.
So they
Well,
regularly bring him to Utah. So Utah can be the head of the fourth industrial revolution, and our children will be good workers
yes.
and quote unquote good people.
Yes.
So according to Castle, SEL is a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities. According to whom? Castle's
According to
transformative.
Castle.
Yes, Castle, and they do not pretend they are not progressive,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what our schools are.
Mm-hmm.
Castle's transformative SEL program is the most popular SEL program implemented in schools today, especially in Utah.
Yes.
Castle's transformative SEL program is the most popular SEL program implemented in schools today. It is also one of the primary tools for queer activists used to help students manage their induced crisis. Castle and those other organizations created the crisis, and now they're here to help.
Yes.
As described by Castle, SEL programs are meant to be transformative, as in causing a marked change in the consciousness of children. SEL programs are said to help students develop character, according to whom, and cope with emotions in a healthy and positive manner, so that they may enter the classroom prepared to learn. To learn what? They're
There's
taking
no
away their
time.
education.
The rest of the day is already done.
There are people who are fighting this, who are fighting it with math, who are fighting to bring in strong literature back into the classroom. And I promise you, it can be done, because I work for a few schools that are doing it. I
Yeah.
work for a few schools who say, yeah, we don't need that nonsense.
Yeah.
Because, and again, that is my opinion, and I try not to bring my opinion in, but it is really hard when I went to our school boards and said, Castle's a Trojan horse. We
Yes.
don't do this to our children. It's abusive.
They're not growing up. They're not growing up learning how to function in society in a healthy
Nope.
way. All of this entitlement and these other kinds of things we're seeing, it all stems, maybe not all of it, but there's a huge correlation you can make between what these programs are doing in school and how these kids, their failure to launch into adulthood has been completely stunted. They're
Yes.
emotionally stunted. And there's an inability to launch into, I don't want to be part of the machine, so I don't want to go to work. I, don't want to be part of, the machine that oppresses whomever, fill in the blank. So therefore, I'm not going to work at this particular place. I'm not going to, I remember being a high school student, and I was so excited when I turned 15 to get a work permit, because I had straight A's, and that meant that with straight A's, I could get a work permit at 15. I didn't have to wait till 16, and got my first job at McDonald's, which, by the way, I was employee of the month one of those months that I was working there, and I worked there for a couple of years. There was this feeling of wanting to accomplish and achieve and move forward
Right.
and develop those skills. Okay. It's not because working at McDonald's is the funnest or most fun, I guess, thing to do in the world, but it gave me a sense of independence, and it gave me a sense of ableism that I am able, and I should say capableism,
Yes.
capable to function and to do. That was what we were trying to produce. And I went to a Catholic school, by the way. We could have spent all day talking about religion, and I wouldn't have turned out,
Right.
to care about that. But we
Right.
didn't. It was highly academic. It was a college prep school, is what it was.
Right.
Where is that? Right? We're lacking it. And meanwhile, we're getting rid of the gifted programs because they're not equitable to students who can't complete the work in a gifted student program. So we're accommodating the lowest common denominator to reach equitability. If that isn't communistic, I don't really know what is.
Exactly.
Because why should I try if everybody's going to get the same grade anyway? Why should I try to do better if, I'm not going to be rewarded by my merit in being really good at math? Why should I bother then? This
Right,
is where enter communism. Here we are.
right. So exactly. So what Castle and other SEL advocates don't tell you in their colorful marketing materials that are all over our schools, all over our schools. I'm trying to think of the, it's called Circle of Hope. Different SELs that you'll see when you walk around different schools. But what Castle and other SEL advocates don't tell you in their colorful marketing materials is that all of this quote unquote character development and emotional regulation is centered in critical context. Critical
Yes.
is
Yes.
the key word. And no, we're not talking about what we think of as critical thinking. We are talking about looking at the world through a lens of criticism. Why is it wrong? Why is it oppressive?
Yes.
That's what SEL is.
Yes.
According to SEL guru Linda Darling Hammond, writing in the Forward Handbook of Social and Emotional Learning Research and Practice, social and emotional learning is based on the transformative and quote unquote humanizing Marxist methods of Paulo Freire. This is what she writes. As Paulo Freire explained, humanization is the process of becoming more fully human as social, historical, thinking, communicating, transformative, creative persons who participate in and with the world. Educators, he argued, must listen to their students and build on their knowledge that they don't have, because it's our job as educators to give them knowledge on their knowledge and experiences in order to engage in personalized educational approaches that further the goals of humanization and transformation. Indeed, that is what we see in schools that successfully undertake the journey of becoming socially and emotionally educated. Socially and emotionally has been the goal of Paulo Freire, a Brazilian Marxist. That's just a fact. And that's the goal.
Yes. Yes.
Just because I am running out of time.
Yes.
Go teach.
Yes. Yes.
A little bit. Okay. Transformative SEL represents as yet another underutilized approach that SEL researchers and practitioners can use if they seek to effectively address issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, and discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination. Again, there is no self here. It's this weird conjunction, don't you think, where it's
yes,
like, there is no self, but yet you're supposed to only think about yourself.
Yes.
But only in the context that they tell you.
Yes.
So it's a facade.
Yes.
Okay. Empowerment, self-determination. It must cultivate in them the knowledge, attitudes, and skills required for, once again, critical, and I can't see it again.
Oh, it says emphasis added. Critical emphasis added. Examination and collaborative action to address root causes of inequities.
Collaborative action.
Yes, yes. There is that idea that there's a collective and there's an idea that there's an individual, and those two things, that's what's I think very confusing, is they do not coexist at the same time. We're operating in sort of this bizarre place. It's like what you just said, where they want you to be thinking about the group, the collective, but they also want you to be thinking about yourself. It's highly narcissistic in its own way, actually. There's a lot of narcissism
really hard
involved.
Way to explain, right? Because
in a very hard way to explain.
Because they're like, do it for the group, but only think about yourself.
Yes, yes.
And I think that maybe when we only think about ourselves, we divide and we fall.
Yes.
That is what they want for the group.
Yes.
And so that's,
well, because there's a way to maintain individualism within a group. I mean, that's sort of, there's ways to do that. And that's, something actually very positive. But here, the group, the collective, is not about welcoming people with all of their differences and, different personalities, and let's celebrate that, and let's, move forward and learn and grow and all of that. No, it's if you want to be part of this group, you need to actually succumb to two very important ideas. The idea that everybody is either oppressed or an oppressor, and there's no such thing as ever ending racism or any of these other things, or transphobic, transphobia. Those things will never be completely eradicated. Those are the two truths. If you can accept those two things, then you're a part of the collective. Then you look at your individual role in creating those environments of oppression or being an oppressed person or oppressing others. And I think that's the best way I can understand these two conflicting ideas.
I think that's perfect. When marketing to educators, Castle presents itself as a straightforward solution to help mitigate classroom behavioral issues. Again, something they created through something called restorative justice.
Restorative justice, yes.
So that is how we're getting these crazy behaviors, crazy things like people getting beaten to a pulp, a teacher going blind last week.
Yes.
Like those things that are happening are a result of restorative justice. Again, something that we definitely have in Utah.
Yeah.
So, and I believe it's all the way across.
It's across the board. Yeah, it is. It's been in California for some time. I'm not sure about Castle specifically in the classrooms, but
yes,
I've looked at a lot of the curriculum from,
so
there's even
the umbrella, right? Castle's the
yes,
umbrella, and a bunch of other things get accredited through Castle.
yes,
So,
absolutely.
and that's why you might not see the name Castle, but generally
it's all Castle influence.
Yes, and if you go to
design,
just somewhere, you're going to find accredited by Castle on there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
So the sales pitch is the mot that everyone buys into. In practice, Castle's transformative SEL framework is a radical program that uses a child's induced emotional crisis as leverage to brainwash them.
Yes.
So Castle's framework is less about learning and more about leveraging our children. For instance, Castle's self-awareness competency requires the ability to recognize one's own biases. We have something where you are supposed to turn in your classmates or your teacher if they have implicit bias. This is a link to SEL, but do you know where this goes to? It goes straight to secretservice.com.
Which, by the way, on Psychology Today, I was shocked to find a couple of years ago an article that, or a study that was done that basically said they could not find any source of implicit bias among police officers in New York City. I was absolutely shocked that such a radical leftist group, such as Psychology Today, would actually publish that study.
How long ago? I wonder if they would still do it, if they would still say the same. So in effect, queer activists say, I know you're uncomfortable now that we've inverted your world, but it's okay. We can help you become more self-aware, and you can finally understand who you truly are. Get it? They're really, and this is where that is where that make sure that you are the one teacher that your students really, really can't wait to see again. This is where you step into the role of parent.
That's right.
This is where that happens. We break you, but we're also here to save you.
That's right.
And I
very cult-like. Well, it is a cult.
Yes. Yes. And I hate to do this right in the middle of one, but I do have to go teach Sunday school. So I'm gonna
we'll continue.
Yeah, and we'll continue from there next week.
All right, sounds good. Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
Have a good one.
Okay, talk soon. Bye-bye.